The summer of 63. Long remember the summer of 63. Um, the Confederacy's end really begins in the summer of 63. And besides the catastrophe at Gettysburg, you're going to have at almost exactly the same time a catastrophe at a place called Vicksburg, the key point on the Mississippi River for the Confederates. Vicksburg is a town that sits up on top of some cliffs, some bluffs above the Mississippi River. And you can see just from this picture here that it's a very wet area. I've driven through it. So it's more bridge than it is dry land as you go through this region. And pretty hard to march an army through. The location of Vicksburg, right here, is a good place to bring beef in from Texas and Arkansas and Louisiana and further west. Other crops come through this way, plus reinforcements. Many of the South's best fighting units come from these sections over here. And of course they reinforced the Eastern armies and the armies in the Western theater here. So this was really important that the Confederates hold the door open at Vicksburg to link the two parts of the Confederacy together. Why did the Confederates lose Vicksburg with all its advantages? Probably the primary reason is, well, there's Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. General Grant does a pretty good job, but it's really Davis who makes the mistakes, which lead to Grant having an opportunity to take out Vicksburg. And for the first place, Jefferson appoints a guy by the name of John Pemberton. You can see here is a major general. Why is Pemberton appointed? He's not a very good general. He's not terrible, but he's not very good. He's mediocre. And the answer is because Pemberton is a northerner. There aren't many northerners who go south. There are a number of southerners who go north, but not the other way around. Pemberton is therefore selected to show that northerners are on the side of the Confederates too. And so he's given this fairly important post. Should not have had it, was not skilled enough to hold this position. Why did Pemberton go south? Well, he had a Virginian wife, and he had served in the South for quite some time with the U.S. Army, so who knows? But anyway, he's there, as a token, really. His boss, Joseph Johnston, one of the very best generals of the Civil War, superb defensive general. One of these guys who can keep like a dozen different things in his head at the same time. Only trouble is at a battle called Fair Oaks, or sometimes Seven Pines, right before the 7 days, Johnston is hit with a shell fragment in his shoulder and in his chest, and kind of bounces off his head. Johnston is going to be in the hospital for a very long time, and essentially he's going to come out too soon. He needs to be, Jefferson Davis wants to make him commander of the West. I can only think this is a bad decision. Johnston himself, and by the way, the two men hated each other, but Johnston himself says, I'm not physically qualified. I'm not physically fit to command yet. And he was right. Davis selects him and sends him out. So the trouble with Vicksburg is this. This is just a swamp. And you can see all the streams coming in, all the streams down here. It's just what can you say? A bad place to march troops through. You can't get ships through because Vicksburg has artillery cannon that fire down at ships. So the Union Navy can't get through, the Union Army can't get through. And we'll take a look at the next slide here. And you see December 27th, 29th of 1862, General Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman, Uncle Billy, as they called him, tried to bring troops down this way through what's called Chickasaw Bayou. Well, with the equipment they had in the Civil War, if you want to march some troops through what's essentially a bog and then up some fairly steep hills and attack a city, we'll see you in a couple of months and give you a different assignment. It wasn't going to work out. Then there's Grant on his side, tries to cut canals that go through and into these streams that go south, and up here the Lake Providence Canal, the Duckport Canal, and this little canal here called the Grant Canal. Now the trouble is with these canals is, canals are like this, but they don't hold water on their own. You have to line them with clay. That means that the ground can't be too wet, because if you do, the sides collapse before you get the clay in, and that's what happened. This ground is just too marshy for canals, and they couldn't do it. You need modern building tools in order to build such a canal. So, you're not getting anywhere. And Grant actually goes on, the only drunk we know of. He was drunk for 3 or 4 days because there was nothing he could do. There was nothing happening at all. Finally, in the spring of 1863, a guy you've never heard of before and will never hear of again, a guy by the name of Benjamin Grierson, puts together about 1,000 cavalry up here, Union cavalry, Northern, and to completely unexpectedly, at least from the southern side, slams into eastern Mississippi and just burns things down, breaks up bridges, destroys railroads, just does complete damage to the eastern Mississippi. Loses, if I remember correctly, about 15 men. 5 of them he had to leave behind because they were ill, and Grierson comes down this way. And there's nothing Pemberton over here in Vicksburg can do about it, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. Pemberton does send some troops out here, but all that does is spread out the Confederate Army. Also, it distracted Pemberton, and he didn't realize that Grant was up to something. And what Grant was up to was marching troops around this bayou, which is a hell of a march, around these bogs and all that stuff. Hell of a march, comes ashore here. Vicksburg is up here, Grant's here. Now, it doesn't help you much if you don't have a navy to get across the river on, big river. But the Union Navy, one dark and stormy night, runs past Vicksburg, makes it, and gets down here, gets Grant across the Mississippi River. And now you don't have any supplies because there's no way for the Navy to bring you supplies because, the Confederates still hold Vicksburg. And what they did was interesting. What Grant did was he just simply cut loose from his base, as the saying goes. That is, he just said, and walked off. And his men lived off the land. Now, it's hard to tell a Confederate pig from a non-Confederate pig. So pigs get shot, and they get eaten. And gosh, it probably was a Confederate pig anyway. What the heck? And so Grant now slides across Mississippi, heading for the capital, Mississippi, Jackson. Joseph Johnston tries to sees what's going to happen, tries to gather some troops together, can't get enough troops to stop Grant, and has to get out of Jackson. He tells Pemberton to get out before disaster befalls him. Pemberton, it's a defensible move, brings his army out here to a place called Champions Hill. Grant has shown a great deal of skill, and you can see all these arrows. He's keeping all these pieces moving back and forth. Grant meets Pemberton here at Champions Hill, outmaneuvers him, beats him. Pemberton falls back and then falls back into Vicksburg. And suddenly you have Northern Navy boats right here, and you have the Northern Army right here. Grant tries twice to assault Vicksburg head on, doesn't work. And then he settles down to a siege of Vicksburg, S-I-E-G-E, a siege of Vicksburg. over about a 6-week period, no food gets in. And by the end of that 6-week period, the Confederate soldiers are living in caves and eating rats and all kinds of junk. And finally, Pemberton accepts what is obviously correct thing to do, and that is surrender. He surrenders 30,000 soldiers. And that's far more than Lee lost at Gettysburg. So Pemberton surrenders on July 4th, 1863, loses about 30,000 soldiers. Lee is defeated at Gettysburg on July 3rd. So in 2 days, the South has suffered two catastrophes and it's not going to recover from that. It is really the beginning of the end. The food is going to get cut off, the reinforcements are going to get cut off, and it's just going to be a disaster from the Southern point of view. I want everybody out there to stay well, stay healthy, take care of yourselves, and hopefully we'll all see each other when this is over. So take care and good luck.